Do you remember those forgotten 10-minute recipes that were too good to forget? They fed busy families fast without losing comfort or care. So why did we leave them behind? Creamed corn and hot dog skillet was one of those strange little meals that somehow worked, even if you never fully understood why. You would take a can of creamed corn, toss it into a pan with a splash of milk, and then add in sliced hot dogs, cheap, salty, and always sitting in the back of the fridge. It did not take long, just a few minutes over medium heat, and the whole thing would bubble into something warm, thick, and strangely comforting. This was the kind of meal you threw together when time, money, and ingredients were all running low, but stomachs still needed filling. It was popular with large families, especially during the late 1960s and 1970s, when processed food was peaking and every cookbook seemed to promise dinner in 10 minutes or less. Kids liked it because it was creamy and slightly sweet, and parents liked it because it filled plates with very little effort. No one called it elegant, but it stuck around for a reason. It worked. Today it would probably raise eyebrows, but back then, this quick stovetop fix was a small act of survival that carried more warmth than most people remember. Mayo and peanut butter sandwiches with lettuce were a curious creation that started out as Depression-era survival food and somehow hung around through the 1950s. You would spread mayonnaise on one slice of white bread, peanut butter on the other, and slip in a crisp leaf of iceberg lettuce in the middle. It was salty, sweet, crunchy, creamy, and confusing to anyone who had not grown up on it. But this sandwich was fast, affordable, and made entirely from pantry staples that rarely went bad. Back then, refrigeration was limited, and you needed quick ideas that kept hunger at bay without a stove. The lettuce added crunch and freshness, a cold counterbalance to the sticky spread and the tang of mayonnaise. For lunchbox kids or tired working parents, it was the sort of oddball combo that got the job done. It has mostly disappeared from modern tables, likely because tastes shifted or people just forgot how common it once was. Still, for the generation that ate it standing by the kitchen sink or packing it for picnics, this odd little sandwich carried more comfort than you might expect from something so mismatched. Hot dog and Velvita Quesadillas were never going to win awards, but they were fast, hot, and oozing with cheesy goodness in a way that only made sense once you tasted them. You would take a flour tortilla, slap on some Velveeta slices, toss in a few chopped up hot dogs, and fold it in half. Into the skillet it went, sizzling in a little margarine or butter until the outside was golden brown and the inside had turned into a molten pool of sodium-rich joy. This was not a dish people planned. It was something you made when time was tight, money was tighter, and the kids were already asking what was for dinner. It was popular throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the heyday of convenience foods when processed cheese and canned meats filled pantry shelves in every suburban home. Sure, it was salty, greasy, and probably not a doctor's recommendation, but it came together in minutes, satisfied everyone, and made cleanup a breeze. These days it might sound like a joke, but to families scraping by or looking for a quick dinner fix, it was just Tuesday night. Canned salmon and saltine patties were a wartime staple that stuck around long after ration books disappeared. All it took was a can of salmon, a few crushed saltine crackers, one egg, and maybe a splash of milk if you were feeling generous. Mix it all together, form into patties, and fry them in a skillet until golden brown on both sides. It was a frugal recipe with just enough flavor and texture to pass as something more expensive than it really was. People often added a dash of onion or lemon juice if they had it, but even plain, it worked. These little cakes were served with ketchup, tartar sauce, or just plain white bread, depending on what was in the kitchen. They were especially popular in the 1950s and 1960s when canned fish was considered practical and dependable, not a novelty or a last resort. They disappeared mostly because people stopped reaching for canned salmon once fresher options became available. But for anyone who grew up eating these quick golden patties, there is no forgetting how fast they came together, or how satisfying they were on a tight night. Cottage cheese and pineapple on lettuce was the shortcut lunch of its time, cold, quick, and deceptively cheerful. You would take a scoop of plain cottage cheese, Place it on a bed of iceberg lettuce and top it with a ring or chunk of canned pineapple. Sometimes it came with a cherry on top, or a dollop of mayonnaise for extra richness depending on how fancy you were feeling. This was the kind of meal served in school cafeterias, hospital trays, and home kitchens across the country from the 1940s through the 1970s. It was part salad, part dessert, and part side dish, filling a weird little niche that modern food has mostly forgotten. But back then, it was light, simple, and easy to prepare, especially in summer when no one wanted to cook. It had just enough protein, just enough sweetness, and no cleanup beyond rinsing a bowl. It vanished quietly as cottage cheese lost its trend status and fresh produce became easier to get year-round. But for those who remember it, that sweet and savory chill on a hot afternoon still feels oddly perfect. Cold macaroni and Bologna salad was the kind of meal that showed up in old coolers at picnics, school lunches, and overnight potlucks. Elbow macaroni boiled soft, then drained and tossed with chopped Bologna, diced pickles, and enough mayonnaise to hold it all together. Sometimes a bit of mustard or sweet relish found its way in, but the recipe was flexible. It was whatever you had on hand. This dish was a masterclass in using leftovers and pantry staples without needing a stove once the noodles were cooked. Everything was cold, creamy, and just a little tangy, served straight from the fridge on paper plates with plastic forks. It became especially popular in the 1960s and 1970s when Bologna reigned as the lunch meat of choice and mayonnaise-based salads filled community cookbooks. It is not glamorous, and it will not win points at a modern potluck, but it had heart. It fed crowds with ease, stayed good in the fridge for days, and tasted better after it sat overnight. That kind of low-effort magic is hard to forget. Fried bologna and mustard sandwiches were the unsung heroes of busy weeknights and quick school lunches. You would slice a few thick rounds of bologna, throw them into a hot skillet, and let the edges curl and crisp before sliding them between slices of white bread slathered with yellow mustard. It was hot, salty, smoky, and deeply satisfying in a way that only comfort food knows how to be. This sandwich hit its stride from the 1950s through the 1980s, when processed meats were everywhere and time was short. It did not need cheese, though some added it, and it certainly did not need any vegetables to prove its worth. It was about speed, flavor, and filling you up with what you had. In some regions, this was a staple in diners and home kitchens alike, the kind of thing everyone just knew how to make. These days, Bologna has lost its luster, but back then, it was beloved. And for those who remember the hiss of it hitting the pan, nothing else quite hits the same way. Ketchup-glazed minute meatloaf was what you made when you wanted the comfort of a full meatloaf dinner without the hour-long wait. You would mix ground beef with breadcrumbs, seasoning, and an egg, shape it into palm-sized patties, and fry or microwave them until cooked through. Then came the signature finish, a thick smear of ketchup on top, sometimes broiled for a sticky glaze. It was meatloaf's quicker cousin, popular in the 1970s and early 1980s, when microwave cooking became a household habit. This shortcut meal was usually paired with instant mashed potatoes or frozen vegetables and could go from raw to ready in 10 minutes flat. It was a godsend for single parents, tired office workers, or anyone feeding a family on short notice. The taste was familiar, warm, and grounded in what people already loved. It just took less time to get there. Some might call it lazy, but anyone who grew up with it knows better. Minute meatloaf was fast food before takeout ruled the world. Cheddar cheese and apple butter toast was a quick snack that walked the fine line between sweet and savory and somehow made it work. You would toast a slice of sandwich bread, spread it with apple butter, rich, dark, and spiced, and lay a slice of sharp cheddar on top. Some people broiled it just enough to let the cheese melt slightly, others left it cold, letting the tang and sweetness mingle on their own. It was an old-school flavor combination that found its way into homes across rural America, especially in the fall and winter months. Apple butter was cheap, easy to make or buy, and paired well with dairy in a way that felt comforting. This little toast was a 10-minute treat that came together with what you had lying around, and it made a strong case for simple flavors done right. It has mostly faded out of rotation now, replaced by flashier snacks and sweeter spreads. But if you ever try it again, you might be surprised how much it still holds up. Ham and pickle roll-ups were the kind of finger food that required zero cooking and always vanished off the tray. You would take a slice of deli ham, spread cream cheese over it, and wrap it around a small dill pickle. Then slice the whole thing into bite-sized pinwheels. It was cold, salty, tangy, and creamy all at once, and it took maybe 5 minutes to make. These roll-ups were staples at church luncheons, family reunions, and lazy summer days when the oven stayed off. They became a retro classic in the 1960s and 1970s when convenience foods ruled and anything wrapped in meat got the spotlight. They also showed up in kids' lunches and adult snack trays alike, crossing generational lines with surprising ease. The ingredients were affordable, the taste was bold, and the cleanup was non-existent. These days, they show up mostly as ironic retro party food, but back then, they were the real deal. You did not need a stove to make memories. Ritz Cracker Pizza rounds were the lazy afternoon snack that saved many tired parents and thrilled even pickier kids. All you needed was a sleeve of Ritz crackers, a spoonful of tomato sauce, and a pinch of shredded cheese. You could dress them up with pepperoni slices or a sprinkle of oregano, but even plain, they got the job done. Once assembled, they were broiled for 2 minutes, just long enough for the cheese to melt and bubble and the edges of the crackers to crisp. They smelled like real pizza, tasted close enough to fool you, and cost next to nothing. This shortcut recipe became wildly popular in the 1970s and 1980s when families needed fast snacks that did not involve a trip to the store or a full oven preheat. It was especially loved at sleepovers, birthday parties, and after-school hangouts when hunger struck, but dinner was still hours away. For parents, it was a way to keep the peace without making a mess. For kids, it felt like getting away with something delicious. It was never about being gourmet, it was about being quick, fun, and just cheesy enough to remember. Quick grape jelly meatballs may sound like a prank to modern ears, but for decades they were a beloved shortcut dish at family gatherings, potlucks, and weeknight dinners. All you needed was a bag of frozen meatballs, a bottle of chili sauce, and a generous helping of grape jelly. Toss it all into a saucepan, turn on the heat, and in under 10 minutes you had a sweet, tangy, sticky dish that smelled far better than it should have. The jelly melted down and thickened into a glossy glaze that clung to the meatballs, balancing the spice of the chili sauce with a sugary punch. People were skeptical until they tried it, but after one bite, they were hooked. It became a popular dish from the late 1960s into the 1980s, when shortcut cooking and strange ingredient pairings were embraced with enthusiasm. These meatballs were proof that you could make something bold and crowd-pleasing without spending more than 10 minutes or $10. Whether served with toothpicks as appetizers or over white rice as dinner, they always vanished quickly. It might seem like an oddball now, but back then it was a surefire hit. Canned bean and cheese burritos were a 10-minute miracle that relied on nothing but a can opener and a microwave. You would open a can of refried beans, spread a spoonful down the center of a flour tortilla, sprinkle on some shredded cheddar, and roll it tight. A quick zap in the microwave made everything melt together into a hot, cheesy bundle of comfort. These burritos were warm, filling, and so simple that even a teenager could throw one together after school without touching the stove. In the 1980s and early 1990s, they became a staple of quick lunches and budget dinners across America. The convenience was unbeatable, especially in households where every dollar mattered and every minute counted. You could make 5 in the time it took to heat one frozen meal. Add salsa if you had it, sour cream if you were lucky, or just eat them plain on a paper towel, no plate required. They were cheap, customizable, and dependable, which was more than enough to earn a place in the hearts of anyone who ever made do with what they had. Egg salad on white bread was the kind of lunch that showed up in metal lunchboxes, picnic baskets, and last-minute kitchen counters everywhere. You would boil a few eggs, mash them up with mayonnaise, mustard, salt, and maybe a little paprika, then pile it high between 2 slices of soft white bread. The result was creamy, tangy, and just rich enough to feel like something special, even though it came together in less than 10 minutes. Egg salad was dependable, one of the few things people could make quickly from ingredients that were always in the fridge. During the 1960s through the 1980s, it was a go-to meal for moms packing school lunches and dads eating fast before heading back to work. It was cheap, filling, and packed with protein, which made it perfect for growing families and tight food budgets. People might forget it now, with all the artisan sandwich options out there, but this classic was once a beloved standard. It was the kind of sandwich that got you through the day, and maybe still could. American cheese and tomato on rye was a simple pairing that somehow managed to feel like a full meal. It was often eaten cold with a slice of bright red tomato layered over a square of yellow American cheese, pressed between 2 slices of rye bread. In some households, it was toasted just long enough to warm the bread and slightly soften the cheese, but even raw, it had a bite and brightness that worked. It came together in minutes, required no cooking if you did not want it, and filled a very specific craving, something fast, tangy, and just a little hearty. This sandwich was a classic in diners and delis from the 1950s through the 1980s, when rye bread was more common in household pantries and processed cheese was king. People loved it because it tasted like comfort food with a touch of grown-up flavor. You could add mustard or onions, but you did not have to. It was strong enough to stand alone. Nowadays, it is nearly forgotten, but its simplicity is what made it worth remembering. Potato chip and cottage cheese dip cups were the fastest party snack no one had to cook, and everyone kept eating. You would grab a tub of cottage cheese, stir in a packet of ranch seasoning mix, and boom, instant dip with a salty tang and a creamy bite. Scoop it into little cups or just leave it in the bowl, but always serve it with ridged potato chips that could hold up to the weight. This was not the kind of dip that took hours or required a food processor. It was open, mix, and serve in under 5 minutes. It became especially popular in the 1970s and early 1980s, when pre-made snacks were still gaining popularity and homemade shortcuts ruled the living room table. It had the crunch, the salt, and the coolness that made it feel like more than just a filler food. It was the kind of snack that anchored card nights, backyard hangouts, and sleepy movie marathons. It disappeared over time as people moved toward more elaborate dips, but for those who remember it, this simple mix still brings back the best kind of nostalgia. Toasted peanut butter and banana sandwiches might have become famous because of Elvis Presley, but for many American families, they were just a fast, hearty, and slightly indulgent way to start the day. You would spread peanut butter on sandwich bread, slice a banana thin, then either fry the whole sandwich in butter or toast it under the broiler. The result was warm, melty, and just sweet enough to feel like a treat without veering into dessert territory. It was especially beloved in the 1960s and 1970s when peanut butter was cheap, bananas were everywhere, and fast breakfasts were essential. Kids loved the gooey texture and the familiar flavor, while parents appreciated how quickly it came together. It was also surprisingly filling, thanks to the protein and carbs packed into every bite. Some added honey, some added bacon, but even in its simplest form, it was satisfying. Over the years, it got lost in the flood of boxed cereals and microwave pancakes, but for those who remember it, it still tastes like a warm hug from the past. Leftover chili over cornbread squares was the kind of throw-together dinner that worked better than it had any right to. You would reheat last night's chili, cut a square of leftover or store-bought cornbread, and pour the hot mixture right over the top. It was fast, filling, and deeply comforting, the kind of no-fuss food that turned scraps into something that felt like a proper meal. This was especially common in the 1970s when boxed cornbread mixes became household staples and stretching leftovers was a necessary skill. It worked because chili always tasted better the next day, and cornbread had a way of soaking up the flavor without falling apart. You could eat it with a fork, scoop it up like a dip, or just mash it all together and dig in. No one called it fancy, but everyone knew it worked. These days, people tend to reinvent things like this with extra toppings and new names, but back then, it was just dinner. Quick, cozy, and more than good enough. Cream cheese and olives spread on celery, was the kind of snack that looked fancy but took no effort at all. You would chop green olives finely, mix them into a bowl of softened cream cheese, and spoon the mixture into the hollow of celery stalks. It was crunchy, creamy, salty, and slightly tangy, everything a good nibble should be. This was a regular on party trays from the 1950s through the 1970s, when finger foods reigned supreme and housewives aimed to impress without spending all day in the kitchen. It also made its way into lunchboxes, especially for kids who were adventurous enough to try something outside the usual peanut butter fare. The whole thing could be prepped in under 10 minutes and served cold, which made it perfect for warm days and last-minute guests. Over time, it vanished as cream cheese dips became more complex and olives lost their spot on the average grocery list. But for those who remember it, this little snack was a simple kind of elegance, quiet, humble, and just sharp enough to leave a mark. Tomato juice and buttered toast was the kind of breakfast that came from a different era, one where convenience, cost, and nutrition were the only three things that mattered. You would pour a small glass of tomato juice, toast a slice of bread, and spread on a bit of butter. That was it. No eggs, no sausage, no fruit on the side. But for many families in the 1940s and 1950s, this was the go-to morning meal. It was fast, cheap, and seen as balanced, thanks to the vitamins in the juice and the fat in the butter. You would drink it in silence before heading off to school or work, and it filled just enough of your stomach to get you through the morning. The toast was warm, the juice cold, and the whole thing felt strangely calming. It is nearly forgotten today, replaced by cereal bars and coffee to go, but it once symbolized a simple kind of care, one that said, "I see you," even when there was not much to give. Applesauce and cottage cheese in a bowl might sound like a strange combo today, but back then, it was a go-to snack for anyone needing something fast, cool, and vaguely nutritious. All you had to do was spoon equal parts of both into a bowl, stir lightly, and chill it in the fridge, or eat it straight away. It had the sweetness of applesauce and the creamy tang of cottage cheese, and somehow it worked. During the 1950s through the 1970s, this odd little dish was embraced in health circles, school cafeterias, and home kitchens alike. It was easy on the stomach, quick to throw together, and it did not require a single second of cooking. People swore by it as a light lunch, a diet snack, or even a quick breakfast when mornings got hectic. Kids might wrinkle their noses, but parents knew it filled the gap without breaking the bank. It has faded into the background over the years, replaced by trendier yogurt parfaits and energy bars. But for those who remember it, that cold little bowl brought a quiet kind of comfort, simple, familiar, and oddly refreshing. Quick Bologna and egg scramble was one of those humble breakfasts that pulled more weight than it ever got credit for. You would dice up a few slices of Bologna, toss them in a skillet, and crack in a couple of eggs. Stir everything around with a fork, season it with salt and pepper, and in under 10 minutes, breakfast was ready. The Bologna crisped slightly around the edges, while the eggs stayed soft and savory. It was fast, hot, and hearty, a morning fix that kept you full until lunch. This dish showed up in kitchens from the 1950s through the 1980s, especially in households where Bologna was a budget staple and no one had time to make anything fancy. You could add cheese if you had it, maybe a sprinkle of dried parsley, but even plain, it hit the spot. It was the kind of meal that needed no recipe and barely any thought. These days, Bologna gets a bad rap, but it was once the backbone of many working-class meals. And scrambled up with eggs? It still holds its own. Instant potato flake pancakes were a quiet little hack born from necessity but remembered for their speed and fluff. You would take instant mashed potato flakes, yes, the kind from a box, add water, an egg, a little flour if you had it, and cook the batter like you would regular pancakes. The result was a light, crispy-edged cake with a slightly savory twist. It was not quite a hash brown, not quite a flapjack, somewhere in between and just fast enough to become a staple. This trick came in handy during the 1960s and 1970s when flour prices fluctuated and people leaned into pantry-based cooking. You could serve them with applesauce, sour cream, or just a pat of butter and salt, depending on the mood. It was a way to use what you had without anyone realizing it was never the real thing. They cooked in minutes, used up leftovers, and made breakfast feel just a little bit homemade. They faded with the rise of store-bought frozen options, but those who remember them know that for something built from flakes, they had heart. Buttered saltines with sliced cheese and relish might not sound like much, but it was one of the fastest snacks to ever come out of a pantry. You would lay out a few saltine crackers, spread a little butter on each one, top it with a thin slice of cheddar or American cheese, and finish it off with a dab of sweet pickle relish. It was salty, creamy, tangy, and crunchy, all in one bite. This was the kind of thing you made in seconds when guests showed up unannounced or when dinner was running late. It became especially popular from the 1950s to the 1970s when convenience ruled and snack trays were filled with what was already in the cupboard. These little bites were passed around on chipped serving platters at holiday parties and family get-togethers, often disappearing faster than the fancier offerings. They were budget-friendly, easy to scale up, and oddly addictive. Today, they would be called retro canapés. But back then, they were just snacks, made in a hurry and eaten even faster. Fruit cocktail and marshmallow cups were the stuff of pastel-colored dreams and refrigerator trays. You would open a can of fruit cocktail, drain it slightly, stir it together with miniature marshmallows and a spoonful of sour cream or whipped topping, then chill the whole thing in little cups. It took no more than 10 minutes to assemble, and it hit all the right notes: sweet, creamy, and nostalgic in every spoonful. Popular from the 1950s into the 1980s, this chilled treat showed up at potlucks, family dinners, and every church basement with a folding table and stack of paper plates. It was especially loved in the summer months when no one wanted to turn on the oven and dessert still had to happen. Kids adored the texture, adults praised the ease, and leftovers almost never existed. It may have disappeared from today's dessert tables, but for those who grew up on it, there was something special about the way it felt like a treat without needing anything fancy. Just a can, a scoop, and a chilled moment of joy. Cheese-stuffed celery with paprika was the kind of snack that looked fancier than it really was and came together in a blink. You would slice celery sticks, fill the center groove with softened cream cheese, and sprinkle a little paprika on top for color and flair. That was it. No cooking, no cleanup, no wait time. It was crunchy, cool, creamy, and just spicy enough to make you feel like you were eating something elevated. From the 1950s through the 1970s, this little bite was everywhere. Cocktail parties, family holidays, Tupperware trays, and school lunches. It was a snack that offered balance, some protein, a little crunch, and a whole lot of convenience. You could prep a dozen of them in 5 minutes flat, and they held up beautifully in the fridge. They faded out of style when more complicated appetizers and dips took center stage, but back then, they were a guaranteed crowd pleaser. It was the snack that showed up when time was short, but a little bit of class still mattered. Baked bean and hot dog cups were the fast food version of a full dinner, made in a muffin tin and ready in 10. You would spoon canned baked beans into a greased muffin cup, drop in sliced hot dog rounds, and broil until bubbling and hot. The beans caramelized slightly at the edges, the hot dogs crisped, and the whole thing felt hearty despite being made from the humblest ingredients. It was kid-friendly, cleanup-friendly, and could be scaled up to feed a crowd. This shortcut dinner peaked in the 1970s and early 1980s when fast, filling meals were the holy grail for busy families. It was especially handy when you only had a few hot dogs left and no bun in sight. Kids loved it because it was fun and saucy. Parents loved it because it filled plates fast. It fell out of favor with the rise of microwave meals, but back then, this quirky little dish was a pantry-powered lifesaver. Microwave cinnamon apple slices were as close to a homemade dessert as you could get without actually baking anything. You would slice up a few apples, place them in a microwave-safe bowl, sprinkle with sugar and cinnamon, and dot with a bit of butter. After 2 or 3 minutes in the microwave, the apples softened and released their juices, making a syrupy, warm treat that smelled like fall. It was comforting, quick, and perfect for chilly evenings when you wanted something sweet but not heavy. This recipe gained traction in the late 1970s and 1980s when microwave ovens were becoming a fixture in American kitchens. It was especially popular among kids learning to make their own snacks or for parents trying to sneak a fruit serving into dessert. No crust, no measuring, no waiting. Just warmth in a bowl in under 5 minutes. It may not be fancy, but anyone who ever made this on a weeknight knows it was exactly what you needed. Tortilla roll-ups with cream cheese and green onion were the first thing to vanish from every lunchbox, potluck table, or after-school snack tray. You would take a soft flour tortilla, spread on a layer of cream cheese, sprinkle finely chopped green onion, roll it up tight, and slice it into pinwheels. They were cold, creamy, a little sharp, and just rich enough to feel like a treat. These roll-ups took less than 10 minutes to prepare and were endlessly customizable. Some added ham or olives, others left it plain. They became popular in the 1980s and stuck around for years thanks to how easily they could feed a crowd. They looked tidy, held their shape, and could sit out for a while without losing their appeal. They were also one of the few finger foods that felt like real food, not just filler. They might not have survived the rise of charcuterie boards and gourmet spreads, but they will always have a place in the hearts of those who grew up eating them. Sardine and mustard cracker bites were the kind of snack that divided people, but for those who loved them, nothing else came close. You would open a can of sardines, lay a fillet or chunk on a saltine, and top it with a dab of yellow mustard. The whole thing took maybe a minute to prepare, and it packed a salty, briny punch that stayed with you. This snack was especially common in the 1950s and 1960s, when sardines were seen as a protein powerhouse and mustard was always within arm's reach. It was eaten by factory workers, lunch pail packers, and even the occasional daring kid looking for something different. The fishy smell and bold flavor kept it from ever being mainstream, but those who liked it swore by it. It was filling, no nonsense, and straight from the pantry. These days it is nearly forgotten, but if you ever find yourself near a can of sardines and a sleeve of crackers, you might just understand why it lasted as long as it did. Poached egg. Overstewed tomatoes was the kind of savory breakfast you would only find in old church cookbooks or handwritten recipe cards from a neighbor down the street. It was practical, filling, and ready in under 10 minutes, even if it sounded a little fancy. You would poach an egg, ladle some stewed tomatoes onto a plate, and serve it all with day-old biscuits or plain toast. The tomatoes were sweet and tangy, the egg added protein, and together they made breakfast that actually stuck with you through the morning. Families leaned on meals like this when money was tight and groceries were limited, especially during the Great Depression or lean years after the war. You did not need much: canned tomatoes, an egg, maybe some stale bread, and suddenly breakfast felt warm, filling, and just a little different than the usual toast. These meals disappeared as boxed cereals and frozen breakfasts took over, but back then it was one of the quiet ways people got through the morning with what little they had. Pimento cheese sandwich melts were one of those quick, bold dinners that came straight from old cookbooks packed with practical, no-nonsense recipes. You took slices of bread, spread them thick with creamy, tangy pimento cheese, and grilled them in a skillet until the outside was golden and crisp. It was not just a sandwich. It was a fast, hot meal with big flavor that came together in 10 minutes or less. Pimento cheese was everywhere back then, especially in southern kitchens, but families all over used it to stretch groceries and add some punch to an otherwise plain dinner. You could eat the melt with pickles on the side or a handful of chips if you had them, but most folks kept it simple. The creamy cheese, the sharp bite of pimentos, the crunchy bread, it all worked together to make a dinner that felt filling without taking much effort. These meals showed up again and again in faded cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards because they did exactly what they needed to: feed everyone fast. Funny how the boldest flavors came from the simplest tricks. Few breakfast options demonstrate how swiftly a straightforward idea can become an enduring classic, quite like egg and dine toast. Although the precise origin of this nostalgic treat remains debated, many families remember discovering it in mid-century cookbooks, where easy instructions and common ingredients led to universal popularity. By quickly scrambling fresh eggs and layering them over crisp, buttered bread, this dish embodies impressive speed and convenience, Recipes of the 1950s often praised its capacity to fuel energetic mornings, especially when garnished with a dash of paprika or chopped chives. The texture showcases a satisfying contrast: fluffy eggs perched on warm, crunchy toast that yields a gentle snap with every bite. Some lightheartedly remark that it's the perfect way to dress up a plain slice of bread without resorting to fancy equipment or time-consuming techniques. Modern cooks value its simplicity and accessibility, recognizing that a few cracked eggs and basic seasonings can create a wholesome meal within minutes. Nutritional experts point out that eggs provide quality protein, fueling busy schedules on hectic weekdays. Applesauce and cottage cheese bowls were one of those sweet, simple meals that came together in minutes, filling the gap between breakfast, lunch, or even dessert when there was not much to spare in the pantry. You would scoop a generous helping of cottage cheese into a bowl, spoon cool applesauce over the top, and maybe add a little cinnamon if you had some lying around. That was all there was to it. It sounds plain now, but back when groceries were scarce and money had to stretch, this quick little bowl was a lifesaver. It was light, cool, sweet, and packed with enough protein to hold you over during busy days. In the 1960s, families leaned on easy meals like this to keep things running, especially when both time and ingredients were in short supply. You would find this simple recipe scribbled in old cookbooks, shared between neighbors, or tucked into handwritten kitchen notes passed down through the years. Some folks dressed it up with fruit or nuts if they had them, but most kept it practical and affordable. It might be forgotten today, but applesauce and cottage cheese bowls kept plenty of households fed, happy, and full with little more than 2 everyday staples. Pineapple and cheese salad cups were the weird little lunch that somehow ended up in almost every community cookbook back in the day. You grabbed a can of pineapple rings, scooped cottage cheese right in the center, sprinkled on shredded cheddar, and if you were really fancy, served the whole thing on a lettuce leaf. It looked impressive in those black and white church bulletins, but really, this was all about making canned food stretch into something that passed for lunch. Canned pineapple was cheap, cottage cheese was always chilling in the fridge, and cheddar somehow found its way into everything. It sounds wild now, but people loved the mix: sweet, salty, creamy, and a little crunchy if you added walnuts or celery. Moms tossed these together for luncheons, potlucks, or the days when cooking felt like too much work. It was fast, weirdly filling, and cost next to nothing. You could find this recipe clipped to refrigerator doors or tucked into those old spiral-bound cookbooks every kitchen drawer seemed to have. It never made the cover of fancy food magazines, but it kept showing up where it mattered, on busy lunch tables when time was short. Peanut butter and banana on toast was not just a breakfast. It was a survival trick hidden in government pamphlets and school lunch guides from decades past. You toasted a slice of bread, slathered on peanut butter, and sliced up a banana right on top. It sounds basic now, but during hard times this was protein, potassium, and energy in one affordable package. Families loved it because it was cheap, quick, and used things every pantry had on hand. The United States Department of Agriculture even recommended it for busy families when money was tight but mornings were busier. Sometimes folks sprinkled sugar or honey over it. Other times they kept it plain. Either way, it filled your belly fast and kept you going. It never made the glossy magazine spreads, but it was reliable, frugal, and good enough to get a generation out the door. These days, breakfasts come frozen or boxed, but back then, a piece of toast and a banana could carry you through the morning. American chop suey with elbows and tomato sauce was how families made a one-pan dinner stretch across the whole table without breaking the bank. It started with ground beef browned in a skillet, elbow macaroni tossed right in, and a jar of tomato sauce poured over the top. Everything simmered together until the pasta was tender, the beef was cooked through, and the sauce thickened up. It took less than 10 minutes to pull together, and nobody left the table hungry. This meal came straight from the old cookbooks tucked away in kitchen drawers, the ones full of budget tricks and fast dinners for busy families. American chop suey was not fancy, but it was dependable, hot, and filling. The elbows caught just enough sauce, the beef added protein, and the whole thing fed a crowd without much effort. Families leaned on meals like this because they worked. They were fast, affordable, and made sure dinner still happened even when paychecks ran short. You could dress it up with a little cheese or keep it plain, but either way, it hit the spot. Funny how the simplest meals stick around the longest. In countless American households, an unlikely pairing of tender greens and sizzling bacon has stood the test of time, bridging convenience and bold flavor with minimal fuss. Quick spinach salad with warm bacon dressing gained traction decades ago, appearing frequently at Sunday dinners and potluck gatherings, revered for its synergy of tangy dressing and crisp toppings that do not require hours of prep. Nutritional experts have lauded spinach for its wealth of vitamins, explaining why it enjoyed a renaissance during health-conscious movements of the 20th century. Yet tradition also holds strong. Bacon's salty, savory bite melds beautifully with the lightly wilted leaves, producing a combination that feels indulgent while remaining surprisingly straightforward to prepare. One comedic spin on the matter suggests that bacon itself could make cardboard taste irresistible, but pairing it with fresh spinach truly elevates the dish to an artful balance of crisp and tender textures. This warm dressing poured over raw greens harks back to simpler times when families cooked resourcefully, blending tangy vinegar, a hint of sweetness, and bacon drippings into a single pan sauce. The entire process can unfold in 10 minutes, or less, if the bacon is already crisp from breakfast. Saltine cracker stackers were the kind of quick, sweet snack that kept busy families going when there was not much else to work with. You grabbed some saltine crackers, spread on peanut butter, added banana slices, and drizzled honey over the top if you had it. 10 minutes, maybe less, and you had a snack that stuck to your ribs. This little recipe was everywhere back then, passed around in school lunchrooms, scribbled into community cookbooks, and tucked away in kitchen drawers for emergencies. It sounds simple now, but in a time when grocery budgets were tight and sweet treats were a luxury, saltine cracker stackers filled the gap. They gave kids energy, kept parents sane, and showed just how creative families could be with a box of crackers and a few pantry staples. It might seem forgotten today, but for plenty of households back then, this quick little snack was a lifesaver. Cottage cheese and canned peach plates were the no-cook lunch that showed up every time the stove was off limits or the heat outside was too much to bear. You scooped a mound of cottage cheese onto your plate, opened a can of peach halves, arranged them neatly, and called it lunch. Maybe you added a lettuce leaf underneath to make it look fancy, but nobody was fooling themselves. It was all about speed and simplicity. Diet cookbooks from the 1970s praised this plate as a light, protein-packed option that took barely 5 minutes to make. It was weirdly filling, cold, and refreshing, especially when summer kitchens felt like ovens. You could spot this combo everywhere, from lunch counters to school cafeterias, with old diner menus proudly listing it as the fruit and cottage cheese plate. It might not sound like much today, but back then, this quick plate was a lifesaver when groceries were tight and cooking felt like a chore. Peanut butter and honey milkshakes were the quick breakfast booster you would find in every 1960s teen handbook or homemaker guide promising energy in minutes. You would toss peanut butter, milk, and honey into a blender, give it a good mix, and breakfast was done before you could even finish your coffee. It sounds simple now, but back then it was practical, filling, and surprisingly satisfying. Parents loved it because it was affordable and kept teenagers full, and teenagers loved it because it tasted like dessert for breakfast. Some folks added ice or fruit if they had extra, but the basic recipe stayed the same. Peanut butter for protein, honey for sweetness, and milk to bring it all together. It showed up in old cookbooks, school lunch suggestions, and quick breakfast guides long before protein shakes and energy drinks filled grocery aisles. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of modern trends, but back then, it was the kind of breakfast that quietly got families through rushed mornings with nothing but pantry staples and a blender. Mayo and peanut butter sandwiches with lettuce were one of those strange little meals that somehow showed up again and again in old cookbooks, no matter how odd they sounded. You spread peanut butter on one slice of soft white bread, mayonnaise on the other, tucked in a crisp piece of iceberg lettuce, and slapped the whole thing together. That was dinner. It sounds like a dare now, but back then it was quick, filling, and surprisingly popular when groceries ran low and people had to make the best of whatever was in the pantry. The peanut butter gave it richness, the mayo added tang, and the lettuce brought crunch to pull it all together. It was salty, creamy, a little sweet, and ready in under 5 minutes. Families leaned on meals like this because they stretched simple ingredients, filled you up, and kept dinner from feeling impossible when paychecks were short. It might not have been fancy, but it worked. And funny enough, folks who grew up with this odd little sandwich still remember the taste. Sometimes getting by meant getting creative. In the realm of no-fuss lunches, there's an easy concept that merges convenience with satisfying flavor. The ham and Swiss roll-up soared in popularity during the mid-20th century, when quick sandwich solutions became standard for busy households. By layering deli-sliced ham and Swiss cheese, then rolling them with a hint of tangy mustard, families could prepare a crowd-pleasing snack or light meal in under 5 minutes. Some comedic observers note it's the perfect dish for those who find sandwich bread superfluous, but nutrition experts appreciate its potential for lower-carb adaptation. Beyond its speed, the combination of savory ham and creamy Swiss imparts an enjoyable interplay of flavors, while the rolled format adds a playful texture. Historically, this approach aligns with the trend of finger foods that gained traction at potluck gatherings and backyard parties in the 1950s and 1960s. The minimal ingredient list highlights simplicity, making it accessible to nearly any home cook. Whether served as a quick lunch or a party appetizer, it evokes nostalgia for an era that prized resourcefulness in the kitchen. Cornflake-crusted fried Bologna was one of those quick, crispy fixes that turned a plain slice of Bologna into a satisfying meal in no time flat. You dredged a slice of Bologna in crushed cornflakes, tossed it in a hot skillet, and fried it until the edges curled and the coating crisped up. That was it. No fancy ingredients, no complicated steps, just a fast, crunchy meal made from pantry staples. It might sound odd now, but back when budgets were tight and groceries had to stretch, this was a clever way to turn everyday Bologna into something that felt a little more special. The cornflakes added crunch, the Bologna sizzled up with salty flavor, and the whole thing came together in under 10 minutes. You would find this recipe scribbled into old cookbooks, passed around busy households, or whispered between neighbors looking for quick, affordable meal ideas. It might seem forgotten today, but for plenty of families back then, cornflake-crusted fried Bologna was a fast, filling fix when time and money were both running short. Egg salad with sweet pickle relish was the batch-made lunch that carried families through hot summers, last-minute picnics, and quick work breaks. You boiled up some eggs, peeled them, chopped them, mixed in mayo, sweet pickle relish, a little salt and pepper, and scooped the whole thing onto soft sandwich bread or rolls. It was creamy, tangy, and came together fast, especially if the eggs were boiled ahead of time. Old cookbooks loved this one because it was practical, frugal, and ready in under 10 minutes if you planned right. It filled up hungry bellies when grocery money was tight, and kids happily took it to school tucked in wax paper wraps. Some folks dressed it up with celery or paprika, but the sweet pickle relish was the real shortcut, adding just enough kick to brighten up plain eggs and mayo. You would find this recipe in faded lunchbox guides, community cookbooks, or scribbled on note cards in kitchen drawers. It might not win awards today, but back then, it was one of those quick, comforting lunches that kept families fed when every dollar counted. Jelly roll-ups on white bread were the quick breakfast treat every kid from the 1950s to the 70s knew by heart. You would flatten a slice of white bread, spread on a little jam, roll it up tight, and slice it into pinwheels. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, fun to eat, and easy enough that even kids could make their own. Families leaned on meals like this when mornings were rushed, but you still needed something sweet to start the day. It was a trick you would find in lunchbox guides, homemaker columns, and those old spiral-bound cookbooks hiding in every kitchen drawer. Some folks added peanut butter, others kept it plain with jelly. But either way, it turned bread and jam into a quick, cheerful breakfast that actually stuck with you. Somewhere along the way, Roll-ups disappeared under cereal boxes and toaster pastries. But back then, it was one of those small, forgotten meals that made mornings just a little brighter. Canned chicken hash was how you made a hot, filling dinner happen when all you had was pantry scraps and a few minutes to spare. You popped open a can of shredded chicken, fried it in a skillet with some chopped onions, and tossed in leftover mashed potatoes or canned potatoes if you had them. Everything crisped up around the edges, browned in the pan, and came together into something that looked decent and filled your stomach fast. Old cookbooks leaned hard on meals like this because they were cheap, quick, and made sure nothing went to waste. Chicken hash might not sound glamorous, but in homes where leftovers were gold, it was a lifesaver. You could top it with a fried egg or spoon a little gravy over it if you were lucky, but most folks ate it just as it was, hot, salty, and good enough to count. This was dinner that made the best of what you had, and back in those days, that meant everything. Funny how meals like this stuck around even when fancier options showed up. Sometimes the fast, familiar ones were the best. Many families rely on leftover rice to create a swift, satisfying meal after a busy day. Quick-fried rice, a versatile staple in Chinese kitchens for centuries, found its way into American homes during the mid-20th century as a simple strategy to repurpose extra ingredients. Versatility stands at the heart of this dish. A handful of vegetables, a splash of soy sauce, and possibly scrambled egg transform plain grains into a hearty platter. Some fans jokingly call it the ultimate refrigerator clean-out, while culinary historians confirm that stir-frying has existed for hundreds of years, prized for speed and efficiency. Nostalgia arises whenever sizzling bits of onion and garlic fill the air, recalling those comforting suppers of days gone by. Some still appreciate how quickly it can be prepared without sacrificing taste. Texture contrasts matter here. Crisp veggies pair seamlessly with soft, savory rice, creating a balance that pleases nearly any palate. Minimal equipment is required, and the process is accessible to novices and seasoned cooks alike. No complicated ingredients are necessary. In just a few minutes, dinner is ready, delivering both convenience and satisfying flavor. Cold spaghetti with Italian dressing was one of those forgotten leftover tricks that stretched a single meal into something new without much time or money spent. You would take last night's spaghetti, rinse it off if needed, toss it in a splash of bottled Italian dressing, and that was dinner or lunch, ready in under 10 minutes. It sounds plain, but back then, this was an easy, thrifty way to keep food from going to waste and keep everyone fed. Families leaned on recipes like this when grocery lists ran short and leftovers became the next meal. The dressing added tang, the pasta filled you up, and it all came together cold, quick, and satisfying. You would find cold spaghetti with Italian dressing scribbled in community cookbooks, passed along at potlucks, or quietly traded between neighbors looking for affordable meal ideas. Some folks tossed in vegetables or cheese if they had any left, but most kept it simple and practical. It might feel forgotten now, but back then this cold pasta salad was a staple for families trying to stretch their meals, save their money, and still have something satisfying on the table without turning on the stove. Peanut butter and lettuce sandwiches were the strange little lunch you would not believe unless you grew up eating them. You grabbed a couple slices of soft sandwich bread, spread peanut butter on both sides, and tucked in crisp iceberg lettuce, because that is what most families had in the fridge. It sounds like a bad joke now, but it was crunchy, creamy, and surprisingly filling. That is why so many old cookbooks recommended it for kids' lunchboxes and quick snacks. Some adventurous folks added raisins or sliced bananas, but most stuck with plain lettuce and peanut butter when time was short and the pantry looked empty. It was quick, weird, and stretched every last bit of food when grocery runs were few and far between. You did not have to love it, but chances are if you were around back then, you definitely remember it. Egg in a hole was the breakfast trick every old cookbook seemed to know. Simple enough to pull off in under 10 minutes, but special enough to feel fun. You would cut a hole in the center of a slice of bread, toss it in a buttered skillet, and crack an egg right into the gap. Toasted bread, fried egg, breakfast done, fast and filling with barely any cleanup. It showed up in kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, always tucked between other quick, comforting recipes. Some folks called it toad in the hole, others sunshine toast, but it was always the same idea, a no-fuss breakfast for busy mornings. It used cheap ingredients most families already had and turned them into something that actually made the morning feel bearable. Kids loved it for the novelty, parents loved it for the speed, and nobody complained when breakfast showed up looking fun for once. It is one of those meals that quietly kept mornings moving, long before breakfast sandwiches and drive-through lines took over. Campbell's mushroom soup over toast was one of those forgotten Depression-era dinners that somehow made a quiet comeback in old cookbooks from the 1940s through the 70s. It was as simple as it sounds, but it filled your belly fast. You opened a can of creamy mushroom soup, heated it up in a pot, and spooned it over slices of buttered toast. That was dinner. It did not pretend to be anything fancy, but when the cupboards were almost empty and the clock was ticking, it got the job done. Families leaned on meals like this when money was tight and time was short. It turned one can of soup into a warm, filling meal that stretched across the table. Maybe you sprinkled some black pepper on top, maybe a little dried parsley, but most folks kept it plain. It soaked into the bread, made the whole kitchen smell like home, and filled you up after a long day. Those old cookbooks were full of meals like this, simple recipes that felt comforting without much effort. Funny how the humblest dinners tend to stick around the longest, even when everything else changes. In many modern kitchens, time remains a precious commodity, but certain comforting dishes remind us that speed need not overshadow tradition. Instant egg drop soup fits this mold perfectly, bridging centuries-old techniques with modern convenience. Historically, egg drop soup features lightly whisked eggs stirred into steaming broth, forming delicate ribbons that float amidst savory flavors. Culinary records trace its roots back to Chinese cuisine, where efficiency in preparation blended seamlessly with nutritional balance. Restaurants popularized the dish in the United States throughout the 20th century, and home cooks embraced it for its swift assembly and gentle warmth. The texture stands out for its silky egg ribbons, complemented by subtle onion or scallion notes, culminating in a delightfully simple bowl. The entire process, from boiling water to swirling eggs, can be completed in under 10 minutes, ensuring that families with hectic schedules find a hearty remedy for weeknight dinners. Versatility emerges as well, as one can season it with ginger, soy sauce, or even leftover vegetables. It's a testament to how minimal ingredients can yield maximum comfort. Mayonnaise and pineapple salad might sound odd now, but back in Grandma's day, it was one of those quirky little recipes that everyone knew how to throw together in minutes. You grabbed a can of pineapple slices, plopped them on a plate, added a dollop of mayonnaise, and sprinkled on shredded cheddar if you had it. It was sweet, tangy, creamy, and surprisingly satisfying. Some folks added a cherry on top to dress it up, but most kept it plain and practical. You would see this salad at potlucks, church socials, or as a quick side dish on busy weeknights when dinner needed help stretching. It was fast, used ingredients people always had around, and filled that gap between sweet and savory in a way that only vintage recipes could. Today, people might wrinkle their noses at the thought, but back then, it was a 10-minute solution to hungry families and empty cupboards. Another forgotten gem from the cookbook that kept so many homes running. Spam and pickle sandwiches were one of those salty, tangy lunches you could whip together before the coffee even finished brewing. You sliced up spam, fried it in a pan, stacked it on soft white bread, and layered pickles over the top, done in under 10 minutes. It was not the prettiest meal, but it was fast, filling, and made with stuff most families already had sitting in the pantry. Spam was practically a food group during the lean years, and those jars of pickles stretched on forever, making this one of the quickest cheap lunches around. Some folks added mustard, lettuce, or even a slice of cheese if they had it, but most just kept it plain. Back then, nobody cared about gourmet ingredients or trendy recipes. Lunch was about survival, and a hot Spam sandwich hit the spot when the cupboards were running bare. You would find this recipe scribbled on index cards, stuck in old cookbooks, or just passed along by word of mouth. It might sound like an oddball now, but back then, Spam and pickles were a lunchroom classic that got families through tight days. Baked bean toast was the quick, savory breakfast that filled countless plates across New England when mornings were rushed, but you still needed something hot and satisfying. You would toast a slice of bread, spoon on canned baked beans, maybe top it with cheese or butter, and slide it under the broiler. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, hearty enough to carry you through a long day. Families loved it because it was affordable, practical, and good enough to stretch one can of beans into a meal for the whole house. Old cookbooks, factory lunch guides, and frugal homemaker magazines all praised this trick for making mornings easy without giving up flavor. Some folks added mustard or hot sauce, others kept it plain, but either way, it was the kind of breakfast that quietly filled bellies when nothing else seemed to last. These days, it barely gets a mention, but back then, baked bean toast was one of those small comforts that made hard mornings feel bearable. If any of these forgotten 10-minute recipes made you smile or hungry, drop a comment, tap like, and subscribe for more tasty memories.